How do you know God? Well, you put God first, you put your spirituality first. I put my spirituality first. Together? I put my spirituality first, and I take nothing personally. Together? And I take nothing personally. You know, I've been told all my life, don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. How do you not take it personally? I mean, you know, who else is around? I mean, and then I realized that there's an aspect of my beingness that's not personal. It's not personal at all. It's spiritual. And I want to share a story about a Unity minister who replaced Catherine Ponder in a church that she founded and grew and built. How many people know about Catherine Ponder, the great Unity ministers, prosperity writer? And she had a church, and she left there. And after she left there, they wouldn't have another minister for another, I think, 17 years, because headquarters wouldn't allow them to, because there was some ornery people in that group, and they just didn't want to put anybody through that. So they had guest speakers for 17 years. I was in ministerial school, and one of my classmates was one of their guest speakers, and they fell in love with him. And he went to headquarters, and he said, they want to hire me as their permanent minister when I graduate. Please, can I? Please, come? And they said, no way. You're a rookie. You're a new minister. You've never done this before, and they're going to eat you alive. There's no way. This is a tough group of people. Well, the board was actually quite good, and there was still a tough group of people in that church. And it turned out that they changed their mind, and they said, okay, go ahead and go, and they were right. It was rough. He told me about, there were things nailed to the door with legal papers and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it was so crazy, and it affected him. It affected him in a way that it showed up in his body. He had a non-diagnosable skin disease he had welts, red welts that were itchy all over his body, and they couldn't tell him what caused it, but he knew what caused it because he was internalizing and taking personally the stuff that was going on. So his board was fantastic. And they said to him, they had some pretty strong-minded people in the board, and they said, look, we're going to take care of this, and we don't want you to go through any more of this. We want you to go out and heal. So we want you to travel the country. Now, this guy was a golf nut, and so he made a bucket list of all the golf places, all the courses that he had never been to that he wanted to go to. And he spent 6 months, this is the golf cure, the 6 months playing and praying. He would play all these great golf courses. Now, I lived out in California at the time, and so he stayed with me for a month, during which I was gone for a couple of weeks, and he took my sports car and he drove to Lake Tahoe, and he played up in Silverado, and he played at Pebble Beach. And I mean, he had the greatest time and did his spiritual work every morning, and also his forgiveness, because today's real talk title or subtitle is Be Playful, Prayful, and Forgiveful. And that's what he did. He played, he prayed, and he forgave. And he had to do some deep work, but he also made sure that he was enjoying himself. And while he was there with me, his skin started clearing up. And by the time the 6 months were over, the board had taken care of all the legal ramifications, and the church was free and clear. He was free and clear. He had no more skin disease. And he stayed there for the next 15 years. Why do I tell you this? No, not so you can go around the country playing golf. That's what worked for him. But the principle is the same. The principle is the same for all of us. So the question is, what's your idea of play? What's your idea of pray? And what's your idea of forgiveness? And he had to do all three, and he did. And it took him a while to get that in gear. But these are spiritual principles that are universal, and they truly work. He had to move from taking things personally to moving to the spiritual level. And what's the difference? Well, today's real talk title, the one that's in your bulletin, is having a vision, not a goal. And what's the difference between a goal and a vision? Well, a goal, everybody's got to have goals. Goals are on the mental level. Goals are about things. They're outcomes. And it's good to have goals. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with goals, but we need to fit our goals into our vision, which is the greater spiritual picture of life. I'm going to go to the airport. I'm not going to be greeting anybody at the end of the service because my son is touching down right about now at Fort Lauderdale. So I'm going to go pick him up, and we're going to spend a week playing and praying. By the way, we meditate every night when we're together, and he and I are going to go up and be with Jane Hart and in the meditation group in Tarpon Springs. We're going to have a great time. And to him, that's playing and praying. But we're going to be playing and praying, and we'll be doing this spiritual work. But in his life, he's got goals. And his goal was to get into his college of choice with lots of scholarships. And he did. He's going to end up, he doesn't have to get any loans. He's doing great, and everything's going to be wonderful. And the bigger goal was to become a music teacher in the school districts, to get his credential, all those things. So he's got a goal. There's nothing wrong with goals. But he got to a certain point with this where he realized, no, my real goal, my vision for my life, my spiritual vision, not on the personality level, but on the spiritual level, not on the ego level, but on the soul level, not in my head where goals are, but in my heart where the vision is to grow into everything I can be spiritually. And then I'll fit this goal into it as needed, as is best, being willing to let it change. And he's very aware. He's very aware that he's not holding it rigidly. But again, goals have to do with concepts, thoughts. They are outcomes. They are mental. They are something that you do in your head, and they're okay. But move past your goal to a vision which empowers your goal and then moves it in a powerful way. Many people in this church have heard a woman named Janet Conner who wrote a book called Writing Down Your Soul and a bunch of other books. Anybody have Janet Conner? You know who she is? Now, I swear, she told me she spoke in this church, and nobody raised their hand at the first service. So maybe it was across the street. I don't know. But she's an old friend. I met her in 2009 when all that was going on in the world, and she published her book, Writing Down Your Soul. Fantastic book filled with miracle stories that are astounding about how she used this journaling exercise of writing down your soul, which is a fast writing journaling method, that to affect various healings, things in her life. And as she was promoting the book around the country, she ran out of money. And so she extended herself to a point where she was going to have to file bankruptcy, she thought. And she thought, wait a minute, this isn't what I teach, writing down your soul. And then she realized, I have been asking the wrong questions. I've been setting goals, outcomes, how many books to sell, how many dollars in the bank, pay off my this, pay my rent this way, all these outer things. And she said, I need to get I need to get a vision for my life. And so she used her exercise method, her writing method, and she found out that what she needed to do instead was seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you. Get a vision and then fit your goals into it. Not that she shouldn't have goals. So she thought, well, how do I do that? So she took a treasure map, image board, whatever you want to call it, and in the middle she put God. And then the petals of a flower coming out were the spiritual qualities that would feed her soul and her soul expression. And then on the very periphery were all of the goals that would be needed. And she says, I put them on the edges because that's where they belong, on the edges. They're the edge of life. They're not the source. They're not even the main expressions. So she said, I got a vision of what my spiritual nature was wanting, and then I plugged in the things that, were there. And she said, and she had made an appointment before she did this with a bankruptcy lawyer. And by the time the appointment came around, she wanted to see the bankruptcy lawyer, and she said, well, I just made $12,000, $13,000, and he says, well, come back to me when you're bankrupt. You're not bankrupt. And she never went to see him. She never made it back to him. She never made the appointment because it kept taking, because she started working from the within out, from the vision to the goal. She didn't plaster goals onto her life as concepts, but rather came in touch with her own spirituality. And this is the attitude of playful, prayful, and forgiveful that makes the difference, that moves us from the personal to the spiritual, from the head to the heart, from the ego to the soul, from that personal part of us that takes everything personally. Now I'm going to stop the talk for a second. I'm going to ask you, raise your hand and give me your succinct definition of taking things personally. What does define taking things personally? What does that mean to you? Taking things personally. I'm taking it personally. Nobody's raising their hand. I am very... Does somebody raise your hand and I'll call him? There's somebody, yes.
Letting what other people say affect you.
So putting what other people say ahead of your own values, letting that affect you, yes.
Thinking so much about what other people are thinking.
Thinking about what are other people thinking, yeah.
I took something so personally I almost died.
Okay, so what is your definition of taking things personally? Somebody else, yes. Getting hurt or feeling hurt. Having a big ego. Okay, so these are all different definitions. So not taking things personally is what? It's letting go of that and moving to something greater, something bigger. A universal consciousness that wants the highest good for all concerned. Wants your spiritual growth. Jesus called it the pearl of great price, the treasure in the field, that seek first the kingdom and the things will be added unto you. The thing that's the most important thing. And what is that? It's your spiritual growth. And my friend in the Unity Church that turned around and he cleared up his body, he grew from the idea of I got to fix this problem to I got to grow into that soul that I truly was created to be, which includes a playful aspect, a spiritual aspect, and releasing all the things that are unlike it. So, what is this playful aspect? What I remember back around that time when we had the big crash in 2009. Well, actually, it was in 2008. It was in the fall. I was speaking at the church, Christ Church Unity up in Orlando. And I was guest speaking, and I knew things were going to come down. I knew there was stuff that was going to be happening. And, as everything the crash had already happened, and I could see stuff. And I spent that Saturday before I gave the talk Sunday in meditation, and I was reminded of an experience I had as a teenager. My marching band in high school was invited to Disneyland. We marched down Main Street, and in exchange for that, we got to not only ride all the rides, but we got to cut in line. So I got to ride the Matterhorn ride, which was a long line, but I got to do that. But I noticed when I got in the little car that the guy who would normally put down the little bar that would protect me was flirting with a girl across. But I didn't really pay a lot of attention to it, but it was important later when I got to the very top and I looked up and there was the bar. He'd never put it down. He'd been distracted. But I thought, oh, I'll reach up and get it. And at that moment, boom, it took off. I couldn't. So I jammed myself hit my butt back here and my feet back there. And I did everything I could, but I couldn't hold on to anything. And I had a choice. And what was my choice? Between just being terrified and having a miserable time and deciding that I'm going to have the greatest time I could possibly have, and it's going to be more fun than I've ever had in my life. And it was just going to be a marvelous time. And I did. And every time, barely inside the Matterhorn, it's like a Space Mountain thing where it's dark, and you could barely see it's going to turn this way or that way or do something. And I would have to, otherwise I would have flown right out of there. And I was having the best time. I just enjoyed it so much. I got off it. My knees were shaking. But it was the best time I've ever had on a ride in my life. And I thought, this is pertinent to what's about to happen. Because we're right at the top, and we're going to go through something. And so I shared that with everybody. And people for years let me know that made a difference as they went through whatever they went through in their particular line of work, or whatever they were doing, and to get through it to the other side, and to have a playful attitude about it. Now that's a strange consciousness. Playfulness in the middle of something is terrible, but that's what worked with my friend with his golf cure. And we need to take that playful attitude. There was a study that I read that said that the more times you hear birds chirping, there's a correlation, the more a person hears birds chirping per day, the saner they are. That your mental health is tied with how many times you hear birds chirping. Did you hear birds chirping today? That's going to tell you something, right? But what is this about? It's about being involved with nature. It's about being involved with that playful attitude. being out there in, gardening. They did a thing where they did a study of people and gave them the loamy earth, and they breathed it and everything, and it had the same effect as an antidepressant. It was a powerful thing. And so there's that. There's also another study that showed that men who had had heart surgery, the number one thing that determined a better outcome, that is that their healing was much faster, was whether they had a dog. Not whether they followed their doctor's advice or took their meds or did this or that, but whether they had a dog. What does that tell you? No, dogs are nothing but fun. Dogs are unconditional fun. Most dogs. Most dogs are unconditional fun. And so there's that playfulness. So what is it you need to do to energize your life, to lift up the energy, and to open up your spirit, and to get that something going in you? So there's playfulness, and it can be healing. It can move you towards better outcomes. Then there's prayfulness. Prayfulness is that prayer attitude. It's taking your prayer and putting it to work in your everyday life and sticking with it. And that's my friend who not only was playing golf, but he really got into his meditation. He really got into his prayer. And of course, he did his forgiveness work as well. And this reminds me of something that happened. A friend of mine, my very best friend in the Youth of Unity, was very much, had a very down attitude towards this world. And I remember us having arguments, and I remember her saying that I'm never going to bring kids into this world. It's horrible. And she ended up having a psychotic break where, well, what happened was that she started acting differently. And I kept asking her, are you okay? Are you all right? There was something wrong. And but she wouldn't, oh, I'm fine, but she wasn't. And finally, I was the only person that she trusted to tell this, but because of drugs, she had a break, and she started hearing voices, and they were telling her to kill herself, telling her all the things that, were kind of in her attitude. But it was so bad that she was ready to do it, and she had it planned, and she told me, in case maybe I could say something, and I said, I took her to a church service that had, similar to our chaplains, they prayed with her, and it lifted for 6 months. But she didn't get out of this mental attitude, and it came back again. And I said, are you going through that again? And she said, yes. I took her back. She went to the prayer service, and then I said to her, you've got to do something to keep your energy up. The feeling I had intuitively was, you've got to recharge your batteries. Learn how to meditate. She said, I don't know how to meditate. So I took her to a place where she could actually learn how to meditate. It was a structured kind of thing. I didn't see her. We were friends for a few years. I didn't see her for 25 years, and I ran into her when I was speaking in some town, and I greeted her in the lobby of the hotel, and she said, I just want to thank you. You did the most important thing in my life that anybody's ever done. And I thought, it had something to do with her not committing suicide. But no, it had to do with her meditating. She said, I haven't missed a day since. It's the most important thing in my life. It's been the definition of my life. I've had this enriched spiritual experience. And of course, she, the one who said that she'd never bring kids into this world, had 2 wonderful children, had an incredible life. She went on to become a chiropractor and very involved in holistic health and quite well known in her area, and really did a lot of amazing things. Again, because she was doing the things on a daily basis that were prayful. So it's playful and prayful. That is taking your spiritual practices and putting them to work and not staying back from your spiritual practices, making them a secondhand thing. This is really what it takes to move from taking things personally to opening up to that universal spirit that nurtures and nourishes us all, but we've got to tap into it. It's our decision whether we're going to lift our spirits and open our hearts and our minds and then experience this. And so, forgiveful, that's the third term. There's no such word, but I made it up. But what is that, to be forgiveful? That is to drop the resentments, drop the judgments that we're holding in our worlds. In my friend's case, my first friend, he had to drop his judgments about the people who were so mean to him in his church, and also forgive them for that they know not what they do. In my other friend's case, she had to let go of the judgment she had about the world and forgive the world and realize that she could create a beautiful world, that it wasn't something passively that maybe the things she saw out here were real, or maybe they weren't, but she could create a beautiful quality of life and nurture her own garden. And so for me, I had an experience of this once. Again, it was during that period of time back about 10 years ago when a lot was going on in the world. And I had 1 week, and I've shared a little about this, where I had about 3 or 4 things happen that were not to my liking. I was taking things personally. I took everything personally because these things happened and they were not to my liking. People were not behaving according to Greg's dictates. They were doing things that I felt hurt by and I thought were just awful. Of course, what I found out was the very things they were doing were pushing me in a direction that I needed to go in. And if I'd gotten my own way, I would have been very, very limited. But in order to move onto a new track, I needed to let go of this. But I didn't know that initially. Instead, I walked around for about 2 days like this. My neck was completely, I'd never had that before or since. I might have a stiff neck or something, but nothing like where I was walking around like this. And here I am, a minister. Imagine me getting up here giving a talk like that. But it's because my perspective was skewed. And I was looking at things weird. And so I got a hold, somebody said, well, have you read Louise Hay? Anybody read Louise Hay and Healing Your Life? So I read What is a Stiff Neck? And it was about only seeing things from one perspective. There's only one way to look at it and not being open to a lot of different ways of looking at it. I know it sounds kind of simple, but I tried it out. I used the affirmation and I started to look at, and I asked myself the question, okay, so how could I look at this differently? I mean, obviously, this person did this and this person did that and these people over here. And then I realized, well, maybe there's another thing going on where this is not the best thing for them, and therefore it's not the best thing for me. And so maybe there's something new I need to look at. And when I really got that, I heard a pop, 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 and my neck straightened up. And that was pretty dramatic. And then things started opening up in my life, and I started to see doors open in my life because I was forgiveful, or I was not locked into a specific outcome, but I was trying things differently. My son, he has goals. But he's going to open up to what? To the highest good and putting spiritual growth first. If you put your spiritual growth first, you may find that your ego doesn't like it one bit. Your soul will love you for it. And sometimes you've got to make your ego unhappy in order for your soul to be happy. What do I mean by that? I mean that sometimes your highest good is not your personal idea of what that is, but you have no idea. You don't know where things are headed. You don't know where you're really supposed to be. You have an idea. You should have goals. It's good to have an idea initially, but then you've got to be willing to fit it into what? The greater vision. And how do you lift up from a personal goal to a greater vision, a universal vision? How do you lift up from your ego to your soul? Well, by changing the agenda of your life from doing it from your head to doing it from your heart. Connectedness with the whole of your beingness. Connectedness so that you want the highest good for all concerned, where it's not about satisfying the little self, but satisfying your soul, which of course is going to give you greater good. It's just you couldn't see it yet. So let's close our eyes and just open ourselves to the possibility of this now moment. And just we're just going to take that fun little slogan, I'm playful, I'm prayful, and I'm forgiveful. And just start with the thought of play. I am willing to take the time to do the things that mean connectedness with that playful part of me. Whether it's gardening or playing with the dog or doing some physical sport or whatever it is, but something that nurtures my soul, that is fun, and not just a mindless pastime, but something that's fun, that's enjoyable, that I feel connected with all of life, with the life that's in me, so that I can generate the energy necessary, the life force, to lift me out of whatever thinking that I've been in. And I think about being prayful, putting myself in a consciousness where I make a decision to practice and exercise that spirituality, building my inner spiritual muscles, recharging my spiritual batteries. Reminded of Jesus, who periodically, even in his exalted consciousness, needed to go to the mountaintop, the garden, the lake, or the desert in order to recharge his spiritual batteries, sometimes with others, sometimes alone. And I make the decision of engaging on a daily basis with those spiritual practices that nurture my soul, that recharge my batteries, so that I too can generate healing energy and harmony in my life. And forgiveful, I let go, and I'm willing to let go of all past hurts. I'm willing to loose and let go and fully release all that has happened in the past. Whether I do the 7 steps or whether I release in some other way, I'm willing to let it go. I'm willing to let it go. I take a moment in silence and just allow myself to feel myself lifting into my, not personal, my spiritual consciousness. I lift from my head to my heart. I lift from my ego to my soul, my personality to my spiritual nature. I lift into this higher presence in which I can hold a vision, into which I can fit the goals in my life. Thank you, thank you, thank you, God. And so it is. Amen.